So we have another very interesting three papers this afternoon. So we'll continue our interesting discussion here. So Dr. Kim Dong-gyu, Baek Soon-gi, and Kim Mina, they are dealing with recently very hot issues about religion, which are 무속, Shincheonji, and far-right Protestantism. And I guess this is why this room is very crowded today. Okay, we're going to have 20-minute presentation, 20-minute presentation followed by about 10 minutes discussion by Professor Kim Soo-ah. Okay, so to save time, let us start. Dr. Kim Dong-gyu.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, it's an honor to present my research in front of my supervisor, Dr. Baker. Actually, this presentation is not a completion of my research about this topic. It's just an idea and some kind of assumptions that will be proceeded to the future research. So maybe it's quite rough. So please bear with me. My presentation is for Korean shamanism as it has been addressed in pop culture and politics. You all know about K-pop demon hunters, right? You may also have heard about the connection between the impeachment of the Korean presidents and shamanism. In relation to those issues, I have the basic two questions. The first one is, where does the cultural imagination that made K-pop demon hunters possible come from? And the second one is, what was the source of political rhetoric that led to the impeachment of the two presidents in South Korean political history? Briefly speaking, in my opinion, the above two questions are always deeply related to the cultural identity of Korean shamanism. Okay, let's see the slide. Yeah. The K-pop demon hunters is highly regarded not only for its musical perfection and K-pop success, but also, I think, for its accurate description of Korean culture. However, what I find more interesting about this work is the idea that the three female protagonists fight evil spirits and protect the community through dancing and singing, and that the protagonist traditions are connected to Korean shamans' activities. Maybe you can see these photos. The center of the protagonist, the wear is quite traditional Korean shaman's costume. Okay. Well, in that sense, I would say that this work appropriated the image of Korean shaman as both a spiritual protector of the community and an artist. However, in 21st century Korean political history, we encounter a completely different image and story of Korean shamanism. Yeah. As you know, the former President Yoon was impeached on 4th April 2025. And there were multiple reasons for the impeachment, but the political rhetoric that led to it included the political rhetoric included the connection between the president's family and the shamanism. And similarly, when Park Geun-hye was impeached in 2017, the close relationship between shamanism and the president also became a political issue. Therefore, the political discourses related to the impeachment, the image is a sort of a cartoon image, but it's about the Kim Gun-hee, the wearing shaman's costume. Yeah. The political discourses related to the impeachment reflect modern thinking that private religious belief should not interfere with the political decision making. However, as you can see on the slide, existing breakfast prayer and meeting between institutional religious leaders and the president were not considered problematic among Koreans. I think that the political rhetoric formed around impeachment reflects the ambiguous status of Korean shamanism in contemporary Korea. As you can see on the slide, there has never been a photo of the president. Oh, yeah. There's no shamans in the photos, right? Actually, there was no photos in which the president and shamans together shown up. The Korean shamanism in pop culture and the political rhetoric or institutional domains appears to have completely different cultural identity. Basically, I try to interpret this kind of ambiguous and dualistic social status of Korean shamanism as the result of 20th century discourse that sought to discover and preserve the Koreanness or the Korean identity and values. First, I think we need to examine how shamanism is defined in the institutional sphere in South Korea. Well, excluding the criminal laws related to sexual abuse and violence, the court rulings on shamanistic crimes related to the effects of rituals and prayers can be summarized as you can see on the slide. The shamanism or the shamanic ritual is quite natural that human beings supplicate supernatural beings when they are in trouble. Shamanism as a traditional indigenous faith of Korea has been practiced since ancient times. That is the actually legitimacy of shamanic practices in modern Korea. Well, in terms of institution. The court judgment, especially the indigenous faith of Korea, the court judgment is based upon the idea that Korean shamanism is a Korean indigenous faith. And it is stemmed from the perspective of nationalists who try to promote the uniqueness and the pride of the Korean people by discovering Koreanness during the colonial period of 20th century. Such terms as the originality and the centrality of Korean nation and culture were connected to Korean shamanism. At the same time, the importance of Dangun myth, well, as Dr. Baker talked about it before, the Dangun myth was highlighted, and I assume that Dangun, as a deity, well, established himself as an important deity in the shamanic pantheon at the time. Such nationalistic tendencies actually shaped the mainstream discourses of Korean folklore scholarship until the latter half of the 20th century. I think I can explain this tendency by telling an episode. Once I went to see a shamanic ritual with my students. The ritual was held for refreshing the shaman's spiritual power, which is called like 진적굿. It's an annual ritual. And it was also performed for Seoul Local Cultural Property Review, 서울 지방 문화재 심사. At the time, an elderly folklorist was participating in the ritual as the reviewer. And his review after the ritual was quite impressive to me. Basically, the Hanyang ritual or Hanyang manji, Seoul shamans, do not stand on the knives. When they need to, well, that kind of ritual, the 작두거리, they invite the shaman from other areas. But they themselves don't stand on the knives. That is the Hanyang or Seoul shaman tradition. But at the ritual, the shaman who was reviewed stood on the knives. Seeing that scene, the reviewer, the old folklorist, says that we scholars really hate jampungut. You have to keep in mind that if you want to be a great shaman, you should follow the fixed order of the ritual. You should keep the tradition. That was the comment which was given by the reviewer. Maybe you can recognize how like the Korean scholarship, Korean folklore scholarship focuses on the authenticity and the true shamanism with this like comment. But unlike the interest in Korean culture shown by researchers in the early 20th century, Interesting, Korean culture in the mid-20th century was initiated from government policy. So maybe the culture, the law of intangible cultural property law, in order to secure the legitimacy of the regime through a coup d'etat, the concept of national spirit or national identity was emphasized, and shamanism came to the fore as a symbol of national identity. With the support of government, a large scale of a folkloristic research project was conducted throughout the entire nation from 1968, and the shaman was regarded as a protector of Korean tradition. However, it should be noticed that shamanism, as a symbol of national identity, was classified as a form of traditional art rather than a religion. As a traditional artist, some shamans were designated a holder of intangible cultural assets. In other words, Korean shamanism became a cultural capital. In the meantime, we can ask how the true shamanism secured its legitimacy at the time, considering the oral nature of Korean shamanism. Roughly speaking, the three elements that make up the answer to this question are the fragmented historical records, the desire of intellectuals to excavate and preserve Korean culture, and lastly, the old-aged shamans' incomplete memories. I would say that this true shaman, or true shamanism, or authentic shamanism, or shamanism as an art, as the result of the conspiracy between shamans who sought to have their status recognized in the public sphere and the nationalist imagination. In this context, I would like to argue that shamanism, appropriated in pop culture, and shamanism as a performing art on stage can be seen as the result of the invention of Koreanness in the 20th century. Of course, shamanism consumed in 21st century pop culture differs from the shamanism in pop culture in the mid-20th century due to nationalist sensibilities. For example, we can witness the change in the media environment where the boundaries between producers and consumers have disappeared from one-way media to many media environment. This change requires us to have a different perspective on shamanism, imposed from above, such as government, or discovered as a representation of Koreanness. That shamanism in a different environment may be called K-shamanism, not Korean shamanism. At this point, K should not be viewed as the capital letter of Korean, which was formed by 20th century nationalist sensibilities, but rather as a new transboundary or boundary transcending brand. Okay, now let's turn to the shamanism and impeachment topic. In the political rhetoric that led to the impeachment of the two presidents, I could not find Korean shamanism that is related to national identity or national tradition. Even in the institutional sphere, unlike the courts, the political sphere tends to use rhetoric based on the effect of images, not reality. The reality may not be that important to the rhetoric producers. Among the dual images of shamanism, the negative image would be effective in attacking the opposition for the group that led to the impeachment of the president. In the rhetoric, therefore, those who cannot be classified as mudang or shaman in a strict sense were called as such. For example, 건진법사, well, in my definition of Korean shaman, 건진법사 cannot be classified as a sort of like shaman or mudang or 천공 as well. And a variety of magical activities were named under the rubric of 무속 or shamanism. In my opinion, this rhetoric was effective because it appealed to the sentiments of Koreans over Middle Ages, who has been exposed to the prejudices against the Korean shamanism for many years. Actually, the negative images of Korean shamanism can be summarized, as you can see on the slide. However, I've already introduced the social and intellectual environment of the mid-century that gave rise to the combination of nationalism and shamanism. In that context, it can be assumed that Koreans over middle age tended to strongly associate shamanism with Koreanness and tradition. If so, how could they become both the producers and targets of such political rhetoric? I would say that it is the result of ambiguity of modern Korean shamanism. And it stems from the gap between shamanism in the imagination and shamanism in reality. Or the success of such political rhetoric can be interpreted as stemming from the characteristics of modern Korean shamanism, where imaginary shamanism and real shamanism coexist. The intersection between imagined shamanism and actual shamanism can be seen at the shaman's prayer site. The photo on the slide was taken, well, by me at Inwangsan Mountain. Well, actually, I use these photos a lot of times, so many of you maybe they're quite familiar with these photos. The banner prohibiting shamanic practices hanging over the shamans who is performing a ritual, and the signboard, the private shamanic practices in this area. But beside that bulletin, you can see the Mudang News, the newspaper. Actually, that newspaper is used and read by a lot of shamans, not for just the officials. And also, let's look at another photos. Maybe some of you know where this place is. Just guess. The Gampo, Gyeongsang Province, the Gyeongju. Maybe, yeah, over there, there is the tomb of great King Mumu. So Mumu Dewang is over here, and a lot of shamans and the Buddhist monk, they visit here to pray and perform rituals. But you can see the bulletin here, because this place is a historic site, so shamanic practices are prohibited. But a lot of shamans praying here, and many tents are established for the convenience of their prayer. It's quite ironical, the phenomenon of Korean shamanism in modern days. According to shamans, although shamanic practices are officially prohibited in Inwangsan and Gampo, the government officials are not quite actively enforcing the ban. Some officials say that shamanism is part of our tradition, while others express concern that they may be subject to spiritual attacks by activating the ban. So it's quite a scary work to actualize the ban. In describing the above photograph, I used the concept of duality, which I diagnosed as the problem arising from the ambiguity of Korean shamanism, but which cannot be clearly classified socially or culturally. Banners, the prohibiting shamanic practices in public areas such as urban nature park and historical sites, can be understood as agents of 20th century nationalist intellectual and official discourses. But it seems to me that those discourses of 20th century want shamanism to be restricted in museums and the performance venue. However, shamans in the real world cannot escape their role as a religious priest who pray to supernatural beings to diagnose and resolve the problems of their suffering clients. A male shaman, Lee Seung-jae, made a long effort to have shamanism recognized as a religion and succeeded in joining the Korean National Religious Council while organizing the Gyeongcheon Shinmyeonhwae, as introduced by Lyra. Shamans who emphasizes their identity as an artist regularly perform a shamanic ritual on the public stage. What is interesting is that there are many cases where shamans who assert their identity as religious figures and shamans who perform as artists are often the same person. So we don't have any kind of shaman as a performing artist, differently from it. We have another kind of shaman as a religious priest. Well, in this context, the the modern Korean shamanism crosses over the categories of art and religion and is formed through the intersection of imagined shamanism and real shamanism. Okay, the last sentence. Earlier, I diagnosed ambiguity as a problem faced by modern Korean shamanism. Oh, yeah. Well, I mentioned that it was a problem. The ambiguity of Korean shamanism was the problem, but it was because due to the lack of clear social classification, well, only shamanism, not other religions, was being used as a material for political rhetoric, thereby reinforcing negative images among Koreans. I felt sorry for that anyway. However, I would like to maintain that ambiguity of Korean shamanism could be seen as the source that enables its dynamism and expansiveness of living as a living religion. According to Edmund Leach, anthropologist, ambiguity is the source of mythical thinking. The ambiguity between religion and art, according to the modern classification system, and the ambiguity between imagined shamanism as a representation of Koreanness and the real-life shamanism form the wide spectrum of contemporary Korean shamanism. This ambiguity is reassembled in the imagination of pop culture creators to complete the K brand, and it also functions as rhetorical devices in political sphere to attack opponents. That's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Baek Soon-gi. I'm from Samyuk University. It is my honor to share my research with you here. My title is Stigma and Charisma. Nice rhyme, isn't it? Let's start. Today, I will examine how the new religious movement Shincheonji in Seoul, Korea became stigmatized by society and the media during the COVID-19 pandemic from 2020 to 2022, and how the group responded through the religious narratives and political theological discourses strategies. After it was revealed that the so-called Patient 31 was a member of Shincheonji, the Korean press began to portray Shincheonji as uncooperative with quarantine, as concealing information, and as a breeding ground for mass infection. In doing so, the media framed Shincheonji as an anti-social organization, even as a social virus. Drawing on Irving Goffman's theory of stigma, I will analyze how such media discourse constructed Shincheonji's public image. At the same time, I'll investigate how Shincheonji react to the stigma. In doing so, I'll demonstrate how a stigmatized religious movement justifies itself through religious narratives, strengthens the charisma of its founder, Imani, and reconstructs its collective identity. So let me say a few words about my methodology. My study spans a fairly long period, 1,046 days from February 19th, 2020 until the end of 2022. And during this time, I looked very closely at Cheonji-ilbo, which is Shincheonji's own weekly newspaper. I focused on their articles, editorials, and feature stories. And finally, I examined the theological and moral defense mechanisms they use in this press. In short, this approach allowed me to see not only how the media portrays Shincheonji, but also how Shincheonji itself actively responded to their own social image. Shincheonji is a new religious movement founded in 1984 by Imani. And this man is Imani. Even before COVID-19, the group was already highly controversial in Korean society. There are a few main reasons for this. First, Shincheonji promotes apocalyptic theology that emphasizes the nearness of the end times. Second, they teach the doctrine of 14만 4천, 144,000, meaning that only this limited number of chosen one will be ultimately receive salvation. And third, they are known for their recruitment strategies called 모략. 모략 refers to a deceptive style of evangelism that has drawn heavy criticism from mainstream Christianity. The turning point came on February 18th when it was revealed that the 61-year-old woman in Daegu, called patient 31, had attended Shincheonji worship services secretly twice. Nationwide anger quickly erupted against Shincheonji. Many Christian denominations labeled Shincheonji as a dangerous cult or pseudo-religion. After this outbreak, the entire public health system suddenly began to collapse. This is a scene from a TV show, a TV news report covering the incident. People were frantic to single out a scapegoat. Right now, the Korean government closed all Shincheonji facilities. There were calls to disband the groups and investigate its leaders, Imani. An online petition demanding its dissolution gathered over 1.4 million signatures. Major TV network connected Shincheonji theology to the virus outbreak. They portrayed Shincheonji as a social virus, secretive and antisocial. Stories about the leader scandals were also nationwide broadcast. Here we can see how major Korean broadcasters shaped public perception of Shincheonji during the pandemic. Programs such as MBC PD수첩, JTBC 막나가쇼, and Channel A 풍문으로 들었쇼 directly connected Shincheonji's theology to the rapid viral spread. On top of that, sensational coverage of scandals involving leadership further amplified the negative perceptions. So overall, the media didn't just report on the outbreak, but they actively framed Shincheonji as a public threat and reinforce widespread hostility toward the group. This scene comes from PD수첩. It shows how television mocked and satirized Shincheonji. And here as well, the broadcast aired a parody of a ride on a white horse from the book of Revelation. TV often emphasizes not so much the individual Imani himself, but the fact that his spiritual mentor is the father-in-law of famous K-pop singer Psy. The broadcast also features a scene suggesting that Shincheonji is like a massive replica of the movie The Truman Show. Irving Goffman explained stigma as a discrepancy between the expected social identity and the actual one. As a result, the stigma becomes a driving force that pushes Shincheonji to the margins of the society. We can see how media plays a central role in stigmatizing Shincheonji. First, through selective framing. The media focuses on practices like 모략, proselytizing method, portraying the group as fundamentally deceptive. Second, visual dramatization comes into play, showing manipulation, secrecy, and deception. Reinforce negative stereotypes in the audience's mind. Finally, emotional amplification occurs when the coverage highlights elements that stir public anger and fear. This scene from 막나가쇼 shows how deceptively Shincheonji controls its internal members. Several ex-members appear in such programs. One ex-Shincheonji member reveals that Shincheonji used members' IDs to post articles across various media outlets and portal sites. Shincheonji also makes use of its own media outlet, 천지일보. This weekly newspaper has served as a central text in my research. The TV program EQ8, 신천지 Deceptive Evangelism 모략, with lying. 신천지 sometimes tails and wiretaps defectors. At this point, I turn to Shincheonji's response to these forms of social stigma. Their strategies include three main approaches. First, public apology. The group expresses civic responsibility by formally apologizing to health authority and the public. Second, plasma donation. Recovered members donated plasma to support medical research and demonstrate cooperation. Finally, counter-criticism. They shifted attention by criticizing far-right Protestant leaders such as Jung Kwang-hun, who defied health measures, effectively framing opponents as a social threat. On March 2nd, 2020, in the front yard of Shincheonji Training Center, Imani voluntarily held a press conference to issue a public apology. During the conference, he even performed the bows twice and referred to himself as this person, a clumsy and unworthy person. 이 사람, 이 변변치 못한 사람. Shincheonji used the public apology strategy. It had three main components. First, formal apology, where the group issued public statement expressing remorse for the outbreak. Second, civic engagement, which involves demonstrating responsibility through cooperating with health authority. And third, image repair, which sought to restore public trust and legitimacy. Overall, this strategy was designed to show civic responsibility while at the same time protecting the group from further stigmatization. The July 14, 2020 issue of 천지일보 featured photos and interviews of Shincheonji members of donating plasma, extensively promoting the process as providing the precious blood, 보혈, freely for Korean society, likening it to the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Shincheonji claims that the plasma from around 4,000 members could be converted into plasma treatment worthy approximately 200 billion won. Shincheonji sharply criticized the situation in which a far-right Protestant group, including Jung Kwang-hun, went ahead with gathering despite government requests to exercise restraint under social distancing guidelines. Interestingly, Shincheonji is effectively redirecting the social stigma of being an anti-social group back onto these far-right Christian leaders. Now we can see internal response strategy of Shincheonji during this crisis. First, eschatological framing. Persecution was interpreted as inevitable at the end of time, explaining through divine providence. Second, sacrificial narrative. That reframed the group as a scapegoat for the nation's salvation while promoting peace initiatives and global endorsement through 천지일보. Third, growth celebration, where group celebrate its membership growth even during the pandemic and held a large-scale graduation ceremony in Daegu to reinforce the leader's charisma. Shincheonji has transformed its victim narrative into scapegoat narrative. July 18th issue of Cheonji-ilbo editorial likened Lee Mani to a lamb being led to the slaughter. 도살장으로 끌려가는 어린 양. Shincheonji also held large-scale demonstration rallies demanding religious freedom. Cheonji-ilbo mobilized letters from prominent figures around the world to prominent foreground the issue of religious freedom. In the editorial, Lee Mani is presented as the King of Peace, Prince of Peace. In the process, Shincheonji claims that their civil rights are being unfairly suppressed and abused. Cheonji-ilbo even framed the death of two Shincheonji members who had committed suicide as sacrificial martyrdom. Despite the external attack, Shincheonji demonstrated that organization's growth continue, revealing that the charisma of its leader Imani remained intact. In particular, the 100,000 graduation ceremony, 10만 수료 양성식, held in Daegu in 2020, was a symbolic event that reaffirmed religious success at the very center of the stigma. This video is held in Daegu 2020.
짙은 어둠 깜깜한 밤 끊어져 버린 생명의 줄 진리 찾아 끝없이 헤매었지만 그 누구도 알려주지 못했어 묻고 물어 찾았어 걷고 걸어서 마침내 다 다른 아름다운 본향 그곳을 찾고 찾았던 생명의 말씀에 빛이 있는 그 밝은 광명의 신천지.
Okay. No time to lose. I'm sorry. I summarized the key finding of my research. First, the Shincheonji faced dual stigmatization during the pandemic, with criticism directed at both their theological belief and their moral conduct. Second, their strategic response involved counter-narratives that balanced partial conformity with resistance to mainstream expectations. Third, we have internal reinforcement, where group cohesion was strengthened through an eschatological framing of the crisis. Finally, in terms of media utilization, the group newspaper, Cheonji-ilbo, played a central role in spreading counter-narratives and refraining persecution in the vindication of their theology. Shincheonji employed several strategies to strengthen the internal cohesion. First, they held large-scale graduation ceremony in Daegu, which served a highly visible demonstration of organization vitality. Second, they emphasized the charismatic authority of their leader, Imani, reminding members of his spiritual significance. Third, they celebrated membership growth despite external persecution, turning criticism into a source of internal pride. Finally, they framed the pandemic as a validation of their prophetic teaching, external scrutiny and social stigma into internal validation, reinforcing loyalty and solidarity within the organization. My study shows the stigmatization does not always weaken religious movements. Rather, it can sometimes make them stronger. Persecution is often reframed as theological validation. External attacks can reinforce group boundaries and identity. The leader's charisma is enhanced through crisis management. And finally, counter-narrative transform criticism into evidence of a divine purpose. My study may have three main scholarly contributions. First, theoretical innovation to study the link stigma management theory with religious studies frameworks. Second, complex interplay issues how media, state authorities, and stigmatized new religious movements interact in nuanced way. Third, crisis response. It documents how religious groups adapt their communication strategies during public health emergency. This cycle demonstrates how new religious movement can transform external threats into opportunity for reinforcement and growth. Thank you.
Good afternoon, guys. My name is Mina Kim. It is a great privilege to be with you today, and I'm deeply grateful to the organizers for the opportunity to present my research. Okay. Today, in Korean society, the rise of far-right Protestantism can no longer be regarded as a marginal phenomenon confined to a few groups. In the wake of the December 3rd declaration of martial law and the ensuing presidential impeachment crisis, far-right forces have filled the streets and public squares, emerging as active political players. Far-right Protestantism has become a central agent that exposes, intensifies, and even reshapes the conflicts of Korean society through the politicization of specific effects. When researching far-right Protestantism in South Korea, it is crucial to adopt an effective approach. This is because their discourse operates not only at the level of ideology or doctrine, but more fundamentally through powerful effects such as fear, hatred, anger that mobilize and bind people together. To understand this phenomenon, therefore, we need to look beyond language or doctrine and examine the mechanism through which nonverbal and non-cognitive force is organized and circulated within social relations and structures of power. Far-right Protestantism politicizes three key effects: fear serves as the basic fuel for group formation. Hatred enforces rigid boundaries between insiders and outsiders, and anger directed at the political authorities, which is amplified and diffused through the politics of the public square. Taken together, these dynamics culminate in the vision of a Christian nation that possesses the power to overcome fear across all areas of society, eliminates the perceived enemies threatening both Protestantism and our country, and seeks to realize a politics of utopian hope grounded in Protestant faith. Effective politics persuades and spreads political messages by emotionally embedding them in the public, rather than relying solely on logical or factual arguments so as to shape and influence public behavior. By eliciting intense and immediate emotional responses, it plays a crucial role in mobilizing people politically, and the contagious nature of effects serves to amplify the impact of these messages. Before we look at the effect effective politics of far-right Protestantism in South Korea, it is important to clarify what we mean by the far-right. Generally, the far-right emphasizes the exclusivism aimed at protecting the socioeconomic interests and cultural identity of true citizens. This logic then justifies the exclusion of outsiders, including immigrants, refugees, LGBTQ+ people, and other marginalized groups. Far-right politics is typically expressed through populism, portraying political media and academic elites as corrupt or incompetent, while elevating the common sense of ordinary people as a new standard of political legitimacy. Unlike conservatism, which seeks to maintain existing order and values, the far-right distrusts institutional politics and shows little hesitation in undermining democratic principles and the rule of law. In Korea, this has manifested in denying constitutionally mandated impeachment and seeking a revival of past authoritarian regimes. More specifically, armed soldiers storming the National Assembly have been framed as maintaining order, keom as keemo, the court occupation as a democracy movement, violent perpetrators as patriots, thereby subverting and distorting the very language of democracy. The starting point of far-right movements in South Korea has its roots in the collective frustration and despair of the public. In Korea, the 2008 global financial crisis triggered socioeconomic instability, lost prospects for the younger generation, regional disparities, and job crisis, creating an effective environment conducive to far-right populism. Amid these developments, South Korean Protestantism faced both internal and external crises since the 1990s. Looking first at internal challenges, church membership began to decline noticeably after 2000. The loss of social trust in churches was also experienced as a crisis by many Protestants. In addition, the rise and aggressive proselytism of so-called heretical sects, 이단, such as 신천지 and 하나님의 교회, sharply undermined Protestantism's social credibility. Looking at external challenges, the rise of so-called progressive administrations under Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun fostered the perception that Korean Protestantism was under threat. For conservative Protestants, societal leftwards shifts, secularization, pluralism, relativism, feminism, and queer theory were all seen as anti-Protestant currents. Okay, skip. Internal and external crises within Korean Protestantism triggered the profound fear of losing their collective identity among believers. From the perspective of affect theory, fear is not merely a response to specific dangers, but a sense of existential and identity vulnerability. Within the Protestant community, this fear often manifests as feeling of insult or humiliation. Values such as love, human rights, and peace are perceived as nothing more than the arrogant doctrines of leftist or secular elites, whose unjust ideas and practices are seen as mocking and belittling Protestants. This sense of humiliation does not remain at the level of individual discomfort, but expands into a sense that the entire Protestant community is being marginalized and rejected by society. Such affective sensations often evolve into a conspiratorial imagination, that is, the sense that everyone else is colluding to desperately isolate and exclude the Protestant community. In this way, criticism or rejection of Protestantism is reframed as a leftist dictatorship, 좌파 독재, or persecution of Protestants, thereby reinforcing a collective effect of victimhood and persecution. Here is an excerpt from a column written by a Protestant youth in her 20s. In a society where if a young person identifies as conservative, they are immediately branded as clueless. We are the true liberals who call for freedom in the face of this so-called leftist dictatorship. This illustrates how such affective structures become intertwined with an existential fear that Protestantism itself can no longer survive in Korean society. Fear reduced the uncertain future into concrete threats, locating its cause in some external source. Humiliation likewise turns into anger at being treated unjustly, leading believers to demonize and despise those who have supposedly humiliated them. In this way, they seek persecutors. LGBTQ plus people, leftists, feminists, Muslims, and refugees have all been constructed as threats to both Korean Protestant identity and Korean society. These others are not imagined only as abstract ideas or ideological positions. They permeate the everyday lives of believers as effects of hatred and fear, and as embodied dispositions of practice. The following is a statement from a Protestant's Facebook video. If our country ends up like North Korea turning red and then we cry and repent, it will be too late. The issue isn't just the same-sex marriage. It's Satan's strategy to fundamentally destroy the family that God has planned. Legalizing homosexuality is part of that. It breaks down families, erodes the roles of men and women, and turns everything into chaos, throwing society into disorder. Society itself is built on men and women, on families. This is Satan's strategy to destroy it all. Hatred as an effect transformed into anger in the public square. Far-right Protestant groups seek to reaffirm their presence through various forms of street politics, rallies, demonstrations, prayer gatherings, and collective marches. Among these, the most prominent performance in the square is worship itself. It becomes a space where affect is collectively amplified and circulated. Fear is converted into anger. Anger in turn legitimates hatred, and hatred consolidates collective identity. Thus, worship and prayer gatherings in the square operate not merely as religious rites, but as key affective mechanism in far-right Protestant politics. So-called 정광훈, 광화문 rallies are filled with anger rather than solemn or a sacred atmosphere of worship. Loud shouts, insults, curses, extreme rhetoric, and unrestrained incendiary speeches dominate the scene. Do you know 하나님 까불면 죽어? Yeah. Moreover, the effect of anger erupting in the square is contagious, spreading outward to surrounding publics and amplified further through digital media. The effects of fear, hatred, and anger culminate in the establishment of the far-right Protestant agenda of the Christian nation ideology. Feeling of humiliation and victimhood are overcome as believers reclaim the position of the strong. Far-right Protestants recover their sense of authority and self-worth through visions of kingship, rulership, absolute sovereignty, divine order, and the theocratic state. Hatred toward others promotes the imagination of a utopia in which perceived enemies threatening Protestantism and our country are eliminated. Anger toward the current political authority, in turn, calls for a Protestant-based political vision. The sense of crisis stemming from both the decline of church influence and fear of pro-North Korea and anti-American forces revives the vision of a Christian nation envisioned by Lee Seung-man. Far-right Protestants revere him as a builder of Korea's Protestant-based identity. They believe that Korea was originally founded as a Christian nation and that the Korean people, like the Israelites, are good, God-chosen people. Some people say the similarity between chosen and Joseon. Yeah. For them, Protestantism is not just a religion, but the spiritual foundation of the Republic of Korea, inseparable from its very identity. A Protestant pastor, quoting a passage from Lee Seung-man's 1913 work, The Persecution of the Korean Church, stressed the vision of the Christian nation. God has especially chosen the Korean people, like the Israelites, to establish the first Christian nation in the East and take responsibility for advancing Christian civilization in Asia. If this continues for a while, the Korean people will look forward to a future of civilization, freedom, and prosperity. At far-right Protestant rallies, it is common to see the Korean flag, the American flag, and the Israeli flag held together. The Korean flag stands for patriotic demonstration, the American flag for the nation of salvation, and the Israeli flag for the chosen people. Most recently, this Christian nation ideology was revived in 2024 with the film The Birth of a Nation, and now forms a central element of far-right Protestant agenda. Far-right Protestants attempt to reconstruct the next generation's identity around Protestantism through alternative education. The emerging far-right force, Busan 세계로 교회, has established an alternative school to cultivate future generations for building a Christian nations, named the 세계로 우남 Christian Academy after Lee Seung-man's pen name 우남. It serves as a space where embodied faith and a worldview are internalized, shaping affective dispositions in students. One way to understand far-right Protestantism in South Korea is through an affective approach. Affect here is not simply a tool for momentary agitation. It functions as a systemic mechanism of mobilization that even shapes institutional politics. Simply criticizing the narratives and practices of far-right Protestants as illogical or irrational is ineffective and may even strengthen their political actions. Effective and appropriate responses to far-right Protestantism require understanding how effects such as fear, hatred, and anger are facilitated, spread, and politically organized. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, we have now we have a discussant, Professor Kim Soo-ah. Where are you? Okay. She is also a member of our seminar team. She is in the gender study program. Please welcome Soo-ah Kim.
Thank you, Professor Jang. I'm Sa Kim, and it's an honor to discuss such important researchers. I enjoyed really these great presentations, and thank you to the presenters for giving me this opportunity to discuss your papers. First of all, Dr. Dong-Kyu Kim's presentation was very interesting and sparked a lot of discussion, I guess. I have a few questions. Building on the example of K-pop demon hunters presented in the introduction, I would like to continue the discussion on the identity of K-shamanism and its relationship with nationalism. Considering how shamanism controlled and censored under mid-20th century nationalistic sensibilities was reborn as K-shamanism, as you analyzed it, brand transcending boundaries are utilized in the K-pop global culture. I agree with your analysis, but I have a question. It is important to acknowledge that these images originated by overseas. Also, you noted that the K-shamanism appearing in the global media is no longer K, as shaped by 20th century nationalistic sensibilities, but the fact that the cited text creators are not Korean, so it's a kind of a cultural appropriation thing, I guess. And if the percentage of local culture adopted as an only visual element appears to global audience as non-K, does this reveal a reconfigured form of nationalistic imagination within Korean audience who accepted it? Until now, Korean content featuring shamanism has often gained popularity in Asia. For example, viewers of the drama Tales of the Nine-Tailed Gumihodeon attempted to recognize the various folk tales and shamanistic elements in the drama as Korean by tracing their origins. So I just wonder, in your analysis, the concept of the K is not related with the 20th century's K shamanism. I wonder your idea about the other K shamanism contents like Gumihodeon. And are there specific regions or public sentiment structure that contribute to the negative construction of shamanism in a political context? You may have noticed political figures rejecting shamanism rhetoric. For example, during the New Village movement, shamanism was actively rejected. Shrines were demolished in the neighborhoods. At the same time, however, the public became aware of the behaviors such as politicians consulting fortune tellers and relocating their parents' graves in order to become president. These behaviors were discussed in rumors or later portrayed in the popular culture, something like movie The King, starring Jo In-sung. Both of these phenomena may be considered a form of imaginary shamanism. So when we speak of the coexistence of imaginary and real shamanism, could imaginary shamanism be a single or unified form? I wonder. And in a complex and ambiguous context, recent cases involving two female politicians, Park Geun-hye and Kim Gun-hee, you mentioned, who have been portrayed as negative by the political sentiment raise also some gender perspective questions. This could be the result of long-standing cultural norms linking irrationality within women. And this article concludes that the ambiguity of Korean shamanism can sometimes reinforce negative images, but it can also serve as a source of dynamism and expansiveness as a living religion. While this insight is highly interesting, I would like to hear further explanation on how ambiguity can serve as the foundation for such dynamism in specific context. Second, I too have a deep interest in the homophobia of Protestantism, and as the issue became increasingly serious in Korea, I understand that several academic societies are holding a seminar this evening on the relationship between homophobia, Protestantism, and fascism. Therefore, I believe that Dr. Kim Mina's presentation is timely and truly important. While I agree with your conclusion of this study, which is considered a characteristic of affective studies, there are also questions that arise because it is an affective study. In this article, Dr. Kim Mina concluded that simply criticizing the narrative of the far-right Protestant movement as illogical is ineffective and may even strengthen their political actions. This is an important insight that emphasizes the importance of affect. But how can we effectively respond to the politics of affect driven by hatred and fear? While it is necessary to understand its mechanisms through an affective approach, it would be beneficial to discuss what else we can do beyond describing these affects. On the other hand, I agree with your analysis of the various aspects of street politics in your research. However, there are also cases where the pro-impeachment rallies that took place after December 3rd were referred to and experienced as a kind of religious revival. The act of creating slogans and singing songs together evoke a feeling of anger, contributing to the internalization of identity. In the politics of Harnett, and so-called the revolution of the light, we create street politics by moving on the basis of anger. Therefore, rather than equating street politics based on the extreme far right-wing politics and anger with something else, I think we need to explain it further. Are there any aspect of religious gathering? Is there another way to distinguish and explain the voices of the street shouting? Is there another way to explain the differences between the affect on the street shouting? That's right. In response to shouldn't we make an anti-discrimination law? And the affect shouting amen in response to the 리제명 out, step down for your unconstitutional speech. Can we talk about the affective dimension attached to the chant? This carry not agreement but pace or magical meaning. This may require a more detailed analysis of the emotional dimension of Protestantism shift toward far right-wing politics. Anger is an emotion that accumulate and adhere to various other contexts, emotions, and histories. It also, I wonder you could add an explanation of what this anger adhere to and where it attached itself. If we consider anger toward the other as an object of fear and hatred, it would be used to add an explanation to specific boundaries that are aligned and attached to enable this anger to be transferred into a manner of defending the state by supporting a specific politicians. Professor Baek-seung's research is also very interesting. The results of this study are fascinating and significant. Contrary to the intuitive notion that stigma weakens religious movement, this research presents findings that suggest otherwise. Specifically, this study suggested that stigma weakens religious movement when persecution persecution is reconfigured as a theoretical legitimacy. The conclusion drawn from analyzing such a long period of data is intriguing and persuasive. I am curious about the effect of certain behaviors as external response strategies. Can you confirm the effect of Shincheonji's donation strategy on the outside? Many groups often choose such donation behaviors in time of the crisis, but it is unclear whether they effectively change public perception. I also wonder if these external strategies are used also for internal justification. Additionally, the analysis focused primarily on article editorials and special features from the Cheonji-ilbo. However, as some familiar with media analysis research method in journalism, I have questions about the specific method used for this analysis. The method presented here explained the selection of subject, but what methods were used to analyze the text themselves? Looking at the analysis result presented, it appears to be a kind of qualitative content analysis. If so, information on quantitative indicators, for example, distribution or frequency of this theme of the news or its temporal changes is necessary to support this result. Additionally, since a significant portion of the study focused on the stigmatization of mainstream media, I am curious about the criteria used to select the media contents. Were the broadcasted contents at the time of the pandemic? It would also be helpful to explain why the framing analysis and the analysis period of the Cheonji-ilbo article differ. While I agree with the result of this study, the process of crisis group building internal cohesion through stigmatization and using persecution experience to reinforce identity does not seem to be limited to the religious group. For example, anti-feminist group also experience this. So if stigmatization actually strengthens internal cohesion, then the methods and strategy of the external intervention may be rethought in the context of our society. If a specific religious group causes social isolation or sexual exploitation issues, and the government or external mainstream media seek to intervene or criticize them, what strategies should be employed to mediate or resolve the problem? Just all of my questions. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you for this discussion, and our presentations and discussion really reflect our interdisciplinary, co-research between religious studies and social science studies, such as journalism, as we saw the discussion. So from discussion, thank you for your thoughtful, insightful comments. So now it's time to turn to the presenters to respond quickly to the points that made from the discussant first.
I will go first. Thank you for the insightful and encouraging comments and some questions. I think the first question is about the relationship between K and Koreanness. Well, basically, when we talk about the Korean or Koreanness, we suppose like there is something unchangeable essence of pure Koreanness. But when I talk about K-pop or K-shamanism, it's like a hybrid. There's no such a thing as like pure essence. Therefore, when we talk about K-shamanism, although some, foreigners can appropriate, cultural appropriation in terms of that, they can appropriate Korean shamanism factors, but if we suppose that there is no such a thing like a pure Korean shamanism, we have just K-shamanism, then we cannot talk about like cultural appropriation. I think the concept of that is a product of 19th century, the paradigm, the nation state. But nowadays, I don't agree with that kind of ideas because, a lot of scholars focus on the transnational, the studies. And the second one is about ambiguity. Simply summarizing the idea about that is like, because of the ambiguity, we cannot insist on like privilege or authority. There's no authority in shamanism in public sphere. That's what I define like as ambiguity. So everyone can utilize the shamanism factors because of non-authority. That's what I call like the ambiguity. But still, I have to work more on it. And the third one is the relationship between imaginary shamanism and the real shamanism. Well, still I'm wondering what is real shamanism, because nobody knows what is real. So, well, in the wide spectrum of Korean shamanism, we can put the imaginary shamanism on that, and the real shamanism with the presumed or assumed the real shamanism can put on some part of the spectrum. So all of this kind of imaginary shamanism and the real shamanism consist of modern Korean shamanism, including the drama or soap opera, the shamans portrayed in the soap opera. Yeah. And so, well, my PhD dissertation topic was about the looping effect. So imaginary shamanism, well, between the imaginary and the real, the feedback process is going on and making the Korean shamanism. That's what I focused on. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments, but very difficult questions. As researchers in the field of religious studies, I am asked by my friends or families what they do and why they do that. I think the understanding of their roots of their behavior is important to start the responding or criticizing or fighting and so on. So I think the effective approach is one strong methodology of understanding far-right Protestantism. And as I presented, I think the hatred and anger grow out of the fear and frustration. So in my opinion, it makes sense to look closely at the certain object or material situation producing and facilitating the fear and frustration among people. That's why researchers focus on the sense of deprivation and poverty of the elderly and main body of 태극기 집회 around the impeachment of Bakune, and now focus on the broad young youth issues in the rise of far-right young Christians. Yeah, and second, yeah, as you said, not all fear leads to hatred and anger. 말벌 and 응원봉 shows that the effective politics can be expressed as solidarity and hospitality. So I think it's important to not only examine the far-right Protestantism, but also the 말벌 and 응원봉's effective politics by comparing both the modes of operations and ways of expressions and historical and social contexts. We can expand the scope of effective studies. One possibility, one just suggestion is the long history of conservative characteristics of Korean Protestantism from the very beginning. And the second possibility is if the sense of persecution of far-right Protestantism comes from being once on top, but now being oppressed. I wonder I can say the sense of persecution of LGBTQ plus, the disabled, and other marginalized, having been always oppressed and excluded by the society, sometimes generate the solidarity and hospitality. Your comments gives me the insight that effective research, effective studies can cover the negative orientation and also positive characteristics of such as hospitality and solidarity. So your comments are very insightful for me to spreading and expanding my research scope and effective research. Yeah.
Thank you for your good comment. Unfortunately, there are not many ways for outside researcher like me to verify what is actually happening inside a closed religious group like Shincheonji. So I didn't have other choice but to focus on Cheonji Ilbo, their daily newspaper. At first, I had a plan to make quantitative research, but I didn't have enough time to gather information, statistics, and data. So in the near future, I make a broad research and brush upon it, and then make a good research paper. My point is not to legitimate Shincheonji. They have problematic strategies, 모략. Whether or not we agree with their theology and their dogma, we have to say that my point is their strategy provide a very valuable case study of how social stigma and stigmatization and charisma of a religious leader can function sociologically. So, as you know, all the lawsuit, legal cases brought against the Shincheonji during the COVID-19 pandemic were dismissed without any charges. So at this point, we have to focus on the gap between mainstream Protestant Christianity stance that view Shincheonji as a heretic sect and anti-social group, and civic and more secular stance that emphasizes freedom of speech and freedom of religion and the separation of religion and state. So I don't want to excuse Shincheonji, but we have to see the paradox of stigmatization in social situation. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I wish I could give more time, but so we have to meet the curiosity from the audience. Okay, finally we have turned to the mic to the audience. Okay, the first raise it in the middle.
It was quite honored to ask something from the Mina Kim. Yeah, actually, that is according to the great Jedi Yoda. He said the fear is part to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Yeah, it's a Star Wars from. And then actually that three thing come from the 17th century Japanese Buddhism. And then where did you get three things? Is that come from the Christianity or where? I'm just, is that come from the Star Wars or somewhere? No, it's that, it's a Star Wars. Jedi religion is quite big at this moment in Western. And then this one is a quite big impact in Western country. And then, so I'm just wondering, where did you get three, it's fear, anger, and then the hatred?
Okay,
Where did you get that?
Okay,
Yeah.
I will get more questions from the audience first.
Can I make a point to Dr. Baeksunge's
잠깐만 선생님
questions? Yeah.
일단은 question 먼저 다 받고 나중에. 오케이. 권영 선생님.
I think this is really interesting to me. That in some sense, like not a humanity oriented, but a very social scientist oriented person is very, interdisciplinary inspirations occurred to me. Frankly say, let me, quick questions. I think Professor Baek and Dr. Kim. First, it is really interesting. I learned a lot. So the effective politics of far-right Protestantism is a very detailed analyzed based on the. But can he generalize, or it is the effective politics, hatred, anger, or fear, hatred, anger, this kind of a conception can be applied by far-right Protestantism uniquely, or can be generalized to apply, can we apply to even the progressive movement, even not only just in Korea, but also other countries in the social movement? This is my first question, is if you say, and secondly, the far-right movement like Jung Kwang-hoon gained some kind of ascendancy in this political scene in Korea right now. Maybe I think as a political scientist, for me, it is overrepresented. And that's the big problem for me. Why do you think this is such kind of a ascendancy? This is, I think, internal discourse does not make sufficient account for this phenomenon. Second, Professor Baek, I think your presentation is really insightful. For me, my question is, Shincheonji has a very successful response. So the stigmatization or external pressure maybe does not, end point. So this is tit for tat. We have to analyze that. That's your lessons. To me, this is also very political interactions. So as a political scientist, we raise questions like if this is things. So why some Shincheonji has a success while others not? What do you think the decisive factors for the successful response strategy or the factors to this divide these kind of things? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so sorry, the time is already up. So I have to stop the question here. So would you respond briefly to
Just one-
first Suat to Baek-sung
My brief comment. Actually, I agree with your analysis. Just I'm lamenting because I feel like criticizing in journalism make it harder to solve the problem. Yes, we really work hard to make 추적 60분, but it isn't any solution to the Shincheonji problem. So just I'm lamenting. Yes, and I really agree with your analysis. I just yes.
Okay, so. Would you go first?
I think every new religious movement have its own unique features, but paradox of persecution, and I mean the religious movement leaders could wisely use outside attack as their opportunity to magnify, amplify his charisma. Within and without. But it's hard to question, hard to find the good answer. But I think, in my humble opinion, a few cases in the history of religion have staged this situation as dramatic as Shincheonji. Shincheonji have wisely strategies and dogmas to interpret and reframed outside persecution as their own divine persecution. So I guess this is my answer. Thank you.
Okay, Mina.
Yeah. In brief, to be honest, I'm not familiar with Star Wars. So I'm just trying to explain the background of the formation of far-right Protestantism, and second, the fear comes from the sense of losing their identity and their existence. So second, making boundaries, I want to focus on the internalized identity process. And third, they grow rapidly and spreading the influences across the country and rising as a political and a key political agent. So I think, I am focusing on fear background and hatred in making boundary, and third, anger, the spreading motivation, and effective politics around the world, not only religious but also politics or secularized, can usually focusing on the three characteristics I presented. But in this presentation, I would like to focusing on the Korean context. For example, Jung Kwang-eun's, I am omit the contents from this today's presentation, but I think I need to emphasize the spiritual and religious history of Jeonggang-un and their colleagues as evangelists, and anti-communism, and rapid economic growth, and so on. So I wanted to put the Korean effective politics of Korean far-right Protestantism in the Korean context. Because of the time limitation, I could not show my own thesis, but I will have the opportunity for that in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, time is up. I have to finish this session. Thank you all for participating in this session. Thank you.